Joining from the NLP Logix AI Collaborate 2022 conference in Ponte Vedra, Florida, we have John Koch of MediStreams.
So John, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah, I know we've got some use cases in the data capture world that we're going to be unpacking. I wanted to speak to you first about what catalyzed your AI journey. For every business we've interviewed in this series, it's been a little bit of a different story as to what made the light bulb go off to say, you know what, we're not doing AI for fun, but now actually feels like sort of the right time to make this move. What was that for you, John?
Well, we've been using OCR technology for years, and what we really found is that we've had mixed results. It has been a good savings of some labor, but we are still spending a considerable amount of money, both onshore and offshore, capturing data off of documents. So we wanted to step into AI and NLP processing with, a small slice of what we do. So that's what really brought me to the NLP team. I've heard great success stories from other people who have used NLP Logix, and they introduced me to Ted and the team, and really kind of hit it off from a technology standpoint. We had a lot of great conversations and moved into proof of concept with them.
Got it. Okay. So the initial prompting here was OCR works fine. Obviously, you guys work with many different complicated kinds of documents. We'll talk about that in a moment. It works fine, but there's still so much manual effort that felt like it could be shaved off in terms of efficiencies for the business. And this was the major prompting factor, if I'm hearing you correctly.
That's right.
Yeah. And so from there, I guess we can fly directly into the use case itself. I think some people are going to be familiar with your business just by the name, others are not. Talk a little bit about what this workflow is and sort of where the pain point comes in terms of all this document intake and sort of data collection you have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So at MediStreams, we process very, very unstructured data, explanation of benefits, which are remits that come from various healthcare entities. And with all of the information that comes in, we have to take all of that unstructured data, capture basically metadata out of that, and turn it into an electronic standardized structure that we can send to our healthcare clients, our healthcare providers. And as part of that process, we've used OCR technology for many years, and it's very template driven. So we lift data off of these documents based on pre-existing templates and rules that we've built. It's not efficient. These documents constantly change, and there's about 6,000 different that we've recorded, and I'm sure there's many more flavors of these documents. So really wanted to utilize AI to figure out how to lift all of this data without managing all of those templates, without having a team of people who constantly tweak OCR, and then a massive amount of human capital, both in the US as well as India, Philippines, and Honduras. We're talking about 550 seats today just to clean up what fell out of OCR. And our workflow is really driven on the front end by identifying just what type of document we're seeing here. In many cases, that's identifying the payer. Sometimes it's identifying the document type. A great example of where you would think OCR or traditional OCR would work well is when identifying the payer. Well, if it says the payer name anywhere on that document, you know the payer. Problem is, in healthcare, a lot of these payers are managed by TPAs or third-party administrators. So it might say Aetna on the document, but it's really mom and dad insurance company down the street that's being administered by Aetna. So identifying, that payer name just using traditional OCR is very difficult.
So yeah, go ahead. Clearly, you're opening the can of worms on the complexity here, but I guess we're going to get into some of where AI and data can help to solve this problem. But keep going. This is good stuff.
Exactly. So where we decided to move with a proof of concept with NLP Logix is utilizing the AI technology that they perfect. And I'm a very strong believer that there are certain things that I do well and certain things that I don't understand. And artificial intelligence is one of those things that I truly don't understand how the magic works. I just know that it works. So we built a proof of concept with the team. We started just identifying these payers. I said, if you can identify who the payer is, even though it might say Aetna, it's not really Aetna. We'll give you a truth deck or a source of truth. If you can use that, and then let's say I feed in additional documentation that was not in that truth deck, can this accurately identify the documents? And we've had great success with the proof of concept. And the second piece to that, right? So identifying the payers, the first piece. Second piece to that is identifying the type of document. And it's important to identify the type because sometimes you'll receive payments from these payers. Sometimes you'll receive zero pays or non-payments. When a payment comes in, typically it has a check associated with it. And what's a very easy way to identify the payer? Utilize the ABA and routing number and account number on the check. I know that when that account is paying, I know what that payer is. But when you're in healthcare and you have zero pay EOBs or denials, which happens very frequently, I'd say 40% of the documentation that we get are denials. There's no check associated with it. You need to identify that this is either a EOB that we need to lift data from, or is it a correspondence document that needs to be categorized and put into a work queue for our client? So it's utilizing that artificial intelligence to identify the payer as well as identify the document type is really what we've done with this proof of concept. And we've had great success with it so far.
Got it. So, and it clearly based on the type of document, the information that's important to extract from it would probably be quite different. If a system thinks it's document type A and it starts trying to strip out a paragraph here and strip out a name here, it may be completely out of context and sort of missing the boat in some way, shape, or form. So identifying the document type clearly makes sense. And it sounds like and this is so common in other parts of business, like procurement. We're looking at invoices, for example. There's really no industry-wide or cross-industry-wide format for these things. Everybody's got their own wacky way of doing it. It sounds like in your space, it's the same thing. In other words, you're really never going to get that much commonality from the various players in this field.
You're exactly right. So I just had lunch with some folks here at the AI Collaborate conference, and it's amazing how this exact same scenario plays out in other industries. Somebody who I had lunch with was in the mortgage industry and very unstructured data, currently going through their own proof of concept with the NLP team. And it sounds like the exact same problem that we are trying to solve here. So it's very interesting that you can apply the same technology to two completely different data sets and net some results that save tons of labor and cost.
Yeah. Okay. So common across different industries, the problem is real, eating up a lot of time. In terms of the training process here, I imagine that what was able to sort of bring this pilot to life on some level was sharing the expertise from your internal teams. Like you mentioned, maybe you're not necessarily the AI guy, but I guarantee there's people on your team that know every single document type and how to find every single relevant piece of information as quick as a human possibly can. My guess is there was a lot of pooling of their wisdom and sort of gathering of their feedback throughout the project there. Talk a little bit about what it looked like to get those subject matter experts and those data science folks to sort of play ball.
It's interesting. So I'll give a shout out to Dawn Bundy on my team. She is my operations director and knows everything about payer identification, document type identification, the workflow process downstream of that. And she is very reluctant to change. So it was a challenge to get her to open up to the idea of trying a different technology. Not that we have to use it, let's just try it. And if we're successful, then we can make a decision. And it was a little bit of a struggle to get the team to really open up. Their initial instinct is, no, that's a new way to do things, and I don't think it's going to work. Now, throughout the proof of concept that we put together, she was optimistic and still skeptical. But by the time we got to the end, I think that she did fully see the value and recognize that this will save a considerable amount of labor. We've estimated, once fully live with just the work we did in the proof of concept, it will save 92% of the labor that we do on payer identification and document type identification. It's a huge labor savings, and it opens the door for other components of our workflow to go through a very similar process. We want to step into it with some of the easier pieces, but I think when we get into really drilling down into the details of those unstructured documents, we're just going to see a huge amount of value from this, not just this project, but future projects that we will most likely be using the NLP Logix team to assist with.
Yeah. And I guess, to your point, the change management element is really challenging here. And so being able to get people to walk forward and do things a little bit different than they've been doing, it is somewhat necessary if we want to stay alive. So we certainly can't have a team that's too resistant to change. But to your point, people are going to want to make sure something works before they're actually using it. And so start crawl before you walk, walk before you run makes a lot of sense here. I think part of the thing that would be interesting for people tuned in who are not handling these complex documents every day would be an understanding of what the before and after workflow looks like. Just knowing how this appears in other industries, John, I have some estimates, but I think you're going to put some color on this. The way I would imagine this works is back in the old days, you'd have OCR that would handle a certain percentage, maybe a relatively low percentage. It could kind of automate some or all the steps for certain documents. And then the rest of them would route through a single or system of humans who would check this box, check that box, make sure we categorize this, make sure we categorize that, and then we file it and push it forward. And that's how I would imagine it worked out. Now, I'm imagining what you're doing is you're taking maybe a handful of those junctures of where a human might have been needed and sort of replacing that with AI. So maybe there's the possibility of using less humans, but possibly there's also humans doing fewer of the really common repetitive things and maybe focusing more on the complex, really strange edge cases. But you tell us, John, what did the before and after picture look like, just so the folks at home can kind of imagine the transformation at hand here?
You hit the nail on the head. There was probably, and I'm going to be generous here and say about a 40% success rate with just traditional OCR. I personally think it's a little bit lower because we're not factoring in all of the times that OCR was just wrong and needed to be corrected. So with that, let's say 40%, there was some amount that needed to be touched. And it went through a very manual process where, users, my employees, would see a screen and the document and have to make a decision based on that information that they see. What we have now is the ability to continue using that same process, but drive down the volume of work that the users actually have to physically touch by about 92%, which is a huge, huge ROI for us. In fact, with the upfront cost and the getting started process, we're estimating about a 14 to 15 break-even point just to fund the development that we're putting together here.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a long time to people who aren't dealing with, finances, but when we took this to the board, they were amazed. They were amazed that we could get success that quickly. And again, I'm ultra conservative with those numbers because I don't like, if I'm wrong, I like to be wrong on the good side, not the bad side.
Completely.
So,
yep. I think, yes, people can relate to that. So yeah, and it's achieving break even, obviously very important. Being able to break through some really persistent, consistent struggle points, I think, is also important for all those years after you make that shift and that change. So, okay, so it does sound like the description of the before and after picture was somewhat accurate. We're talking about, humans in some cases just not having to see documents at all, or in other cases, having to do much fewer things with an individual document in order to have it fully processed and locked and loaded.
That's correct. And we have plenty of other things for those humans to be working on. So this is not a direct labor arbitrage type scenario. This is, let's put these humans on tasks that generate revenue rather than tasks that raise expenses.
All day long. That totally makes sense. So this can take us a little bit into our last question here today. I know you guys just have the one pilot with NLP Logix. I think we've done a pretty good job crystallizing the business problem and what the before and after impact was. Now we can talk a little bit about where this is taking us. So clearly being able to handle documents in a new way and have this more nimble way of categorizing, classifying, stripping out data, et cetera, is kind of building a capability, if you will. And this capability might even allow you to do more things in the future. When you look forward and you ask, okay, how can building this mastery of documents and this kind of data intake and processing workflow, where does this take us maybe a couple years from now? What might be the next level up beyond the functionality that we've had with this pilot? What might even be the other capabilities we can unlock? What's already on your mind there? How do you see kind of the future of these processes in your industry?
So I wanted to just do this pilot so we can prove that AI has a place in our space. I'm really super excited about statistical AI running on the data that we have. We have billions of claims across over 9,000 provider locations. There's tons of information there. And I look at that like just a gold mine of new product ideas, new product offerings. And I think that AI is front and center there. There are, predictive things that we can do with that data. One of the things that I'd really like to build going into the future is the capability to predict what payment cycles look like based on past history or regionality or the type of provider site, whether it's a ortho provider or a dermatology provider. There's very interesting trends that come out of all of that data. And traditional data analytics, I think, are great. But when you bring AI and start getting predictive with that data, then you have something special. So I'm really looking forward to building some new products with a focus on AI with the healthcare information that we already have.
Cool. So you're sort of imagining the extrapolation, not just going from what can we pull off of these documents, but okay, if we can pull it off and reliably categorize it, what next step decision might we predict? What's the So what's the downstream value that we can kind of roll forward out of this initial capability?
You think about, financial institutions who provide loans for some of these healthcare providers. They need to be able to look at a healthcare claim and predict what that payment will be, which is very difficult, as we all know. Just because your invoice says $100 from your doctor doesn't mean that that's what your insurance carrier is going to pay. So valuing the receivables for healthcare institutions it's really a dark art right now, and nobody does it well. And utilizing payment trends, AI, I feel like we have the data across the board. We can use artificial intelligence to get that information and help these providers get loans for, a new building that they might want to add. So that's just the tip of the iceberg on some of the things that can be done with AI in healthcare. And there's nobody out there who's really doing it well yet. And I'm sure there will be, but I want to be at the forefront of that trend.
Makes sense. And you are right to say that it's not exactly fast moving across the board in that category of healthcare, but luckily there are players making some headway. You guys are obviously running your pilots, and hopefully we'll have some interesting learnings and developments there. We've got a little bit more time here, John. I want to bounce one final question off you as we wrap. There's a lot of folks who might tune into this series with NLP Logix who are going to at some point start on their own AI and data journey. They might start with a pilot project, kind of like you did. And they might be wondering, all right, well, what are important things for me to bear in mind around picking a good first project that's really worth this kind of R&D investment, that's worth this kind of partnership and deeper work? This is not stuff that's going to be an ROI in 2 days. this is going to be a significant more R&D type investment. What should other business leaders know and learn around selecting projects and really preparing themselves for what those first pilots look like?
My advice would be to start with a small, attainable goal that's realistic. It is very easy to get lost in the weeds when you think about all of the cool things that AI can do for you. But if you choose a pilot project that is very easy and attainable to prove out that the AI is going to do what you think it does, then you have that buy-in from the rest of your team, especially the people like Adon, who might be a naysayer, or people on the technical side who think that they might be able to do it themselves. By starting with a small pilot and proving out a business case, then you have the ability to then expand into some of these more pie in the sky type ideas. And I have a lot of those when it comes to AI. It's managing people like me who want to go out and look at all of the new products that we can build, and managing the people like Don who don't want any change in the world, and meeting somewhere in the middle with a small attainable goal that's relevant to the organization is probably the best way to go. And once that proof of concept gets built, then you have the ability to start expanding a little bit further and a little bit further. And eventually you can get to some of those fun projects that are all dreams.
Yes, in the early days, they certainly are nothing but dreams. Okay, got it. So there's sort of a walking of the tightrope between the too conservative and too ambitious folks that you're articulating here. And it sounds like the critical takeaway is attainability and sort of definability of that early objective. Can we get everybody, whether they're conservative or they're aggressive, to say, you know what, this is a worthy project and it's worth trying? It sounds like getting to that threshold is really important.
It is, absolutely.
Okay, got it. Cool.
And I think that was the biggest barrier for us to start. It was just getting everybody on the team on board with the project. But now that everybody is, and the project has been successful, it's really, now how do we manage the growth of this, and how do we do it in a smart way that we can show cost savings on top of adding in some of that new flashy technology that we can bring to our clients in terms of new products.
I think that's a salient lesson for the other folks who are tuned in or are going to be going through a similar journey. John, I know that's all we have for time, but thank you so much for being able to join us on the show here. This has been great.
Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate it.
For more in this series, visit nlplogix.com. That's Logix with an X. With an X.